After the Treasurer handed down the mid-year budget update here at Parliament House, I spoke to Josh Frydenberg. Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, thanks for your time.
Nice to be with you.
You made it very clear to the states that the situation in New South Wales does not warrant closing the borders. You were very frank and forceful in that news conference today. How damaging would it be to the confidence which underpins these stronger numbers in MyEFO if a state were to close the borders again?
Well, the economy is gaining momentum, and we saw that in this budget update, but also in the unemployment numbers that came out today, with the unemployment rate falling from 7% down to 6.8%, 90,000 jobs being created, 84,000 of those, Kieran, being full-time jobs, very strong jobs growth in Victoria, and effectively the unemployment rate, the effective unemployment rate, and the traditional unemployment rate converging, which is the first time since the start of the pandemic. So the momentum is really building. Now, what upsets momentum is a stop-start nature of these border closures, because border closures cost jobs. And so it is very important that the New South Wales health system, as it has done previously, is allowed to get about doing its work and suppress the virus, do the contact tracing, and then other states hold their horses, and we continue to maintain free travel among the states.
Because as you put it earlier, for consumers, for the Australian household, they've got their confidence back. If the borders were to close prematurely, in your words, what sort of impact would that have? Would that prick the balloon, so to speak?
It would dent confidence. Business confidence and consumer confidence. You see, over the last 15 weeks, 14 of those have seen an increase in consumer confidence. The 1 week where it was down was the week that South Australia went into lockdown. And it's really important that we maintain this momentum. Consumer and business confidence is key. We want people spending, we want people working, we want people travelling, we want people getting about doing their normal lives, but in a COVID-safe way.
When you look at the MyEFO assumptions, the one that there were a few that jump out, but one in particular, the WA border is assumed to stay open now for all of next year. It's open as we speak, and to remain open throughout 2021. The budget had said that it would reopen in April, so that's a bit of a change. Given Mark McGowan's rhetoric, that's a brave assumption, isn't it?
Well, again, it's based on what we know today, and that is that the borders have opened across the country. We've been conservative in a number of our assumptions in this budget, whether it's the iron ore price, which is, as you know, well north of $100. Today, we have it in the budget at $55 from the September quarter next year. We have an assumption that the vaccine, despite recent positive developments, will still be rolled out across the nation by the end of next year. When it comes to international borders, we have said that there will be a gradual increase in tourism and students over the course of the end of next year, but it still will be small numbers, and then we'll see an opening hopefully after that. So we have been conservative, or prudent if you like, in our assumptions behind today's numbers, but certainly the overall trend is our friend, namely that the jobs are coming back, confidence is up, and the economy is growing again.
The downside risks include the COVID situation, and you rightly point out that New South Wales has had a very strong track record in testing and tracing, but it's a reminder, isn't it, of how volatile this thing is, the events in New South Wales.
Well, we have a long way to go in the recovery, and I made that point, I hope, clearly in the press conference. These are encouraging numbers. The comeback in the economy is on, but we have a long way to go. And you see that with new cases coming out, new virus cases coming out across the country. While in small numbers, they're still there. Globally, you're seeing second and third waves of COVID-19, including new lockdowns. And then, of course, I also mentioned the trade tensions with China and the impact that could have on on our economy as well.
I want to ask you about that because let's start, because there's a few different elements to it, but if you look at the coal exports, at the moment they're targeting, reportedly targeting thermal coal. We are the predominant exporter of metallurgical coal, I think 55% of the world market or thereabouts. Is that a bit of an insurance in the sense that China needs the steel for their growth, that metallurgical coal should be okay, that iron ore should be okay, given their demands?
Well, the dynamics in the iron ore market are different to in the coal market. In the iron ore market, Australia supplies more than 60% of China's needs. And while Brazil produces iron ore, they've had a disruption to their supply. Now, there are investments going on in Guinea and other new markets to develop new mines, but Australia has a world-leading position in the iron ore market, not just in terms of volume, but also in terms of the quality of our product. And we know that China is not only a huge consumer of steel domestically, which has underpinned their economic growth and the lifting of hundreds of millions of Chinese out of poverty, but also they're a big steel exporter. And this is a big domestic industry. So they need our resources. That is...
Including the metallurgical coal. So is that a bit of an insurance for us that it can only go so far, this row?
Well, I don't want to be looking down a crystal ball at a crystal ball. What I will say is that relationship with China is mutually beneficial. It's important to China because our resources help underpin their economic growth. And of course, it's important to Australia because it's a major source of income and jobs.
When it comes to the iron ore price, we've seen it quite volatile. It's high at the moment. Is that a potential olive branch to China to say, look, if we put the pricing on a more stable time frame? I think it used to be a sort of a 3-month forwards, the Chinese futures price. So they had a bit of certainty across a 3-month period. It is quite volatile, this spot price. Is that an olive branch you could extend to them to say, let's get back to the table? Let's
not forget that when Labor was in, the iron ore price was much higher than it is today. In fact, we saw it get up to $180 during their time in office. It does fluctuate, you're right, and it can be a factor or it can be a reflection of what is happening, for example, in Brazil, where they had a dam collapse and major problems with their supply. Then that shot up the price because it was a supply-demand issue. China knows that we're a very reliable exporter. The prices are high today, other times they've been low. That's why we have adopted in this budget a pretty prudent assumption about where the price will be. In the budget on October the 6th, we assumed that the price would come down to $55 a tonne free on board, US dollars a tonne free on board, at the end of the June, by the June quarter. Now we're saying 1 quarter later, namely the September quarter.
The home builder program has worked. It's propped up the building sector and, obviously good for jobs too. What happens at the end of that to avoid a slump?
Well, the good news about that program is that while the incentive is there to sign contracts with builders out to the end of March, you don't need to turn the first sod, so to speak, for 6 months from that signing date. That means that there will be a continued pipeline of work, not just into next year but beyond, and you've heard that from the building industry themselves, who have described this as a remarkable program.
Are you open to social housing? Well, this is working now in terms of the private sector.
We already support social and affordable housing through bodies like NIFIC, which we put an extra $1 billion in the budget to. And so we do support there. We provide rent assistance as well, which is more than $4 billion a year.
Job Seeker, the unemployment benefit, you won't send it back to what it was pre-COVID, would you?
Well, what we've done in this update is provide $3.2 billion for the extension of the supplement out to the end of March.
But you're not going to send it back to pre-COVID. You couldn't. I mean, how could you do?
Well, the best thing.
Everyone from the Business Council to John Howard, your mentor, says it's too low. You're not going to send it back to pre-COVID.
Well, Kieran, our focus is on getting people into jobs. what we saw pre-COVID with JobSeeker, or the equivalent, which was then Newstart, is that people were moving from that unemployment benefit into work, by and large. And large numbers were doing that.
But you can't
so what we want to do is
the pre-COVID level, $40 a day.
And it's going to be a different labour market as a result of COVID than it was pre-COVID. And we fully understand that. But
okay, so you're not going to send it back to pre-COVID?
Well, I'm not going to get into that level
of speculation. Why don't you give the people some reassurance who find themselves unemployed?
Well, the reassurance that we give the Australian people is that we will do everything to create jobs. And what we've seen in today's update is that the unemployment rate will come down faster than we even expected at budget 10 weeks ago.
Final question, or final issue. I read Paul Kelly's piece at the weekend, an excellent piece about how what Chris Richardson said, you landed the plane on the Hudson River, basically, in an economic sense. But you spoke to John Howard in the teeth of the crisis, and you told him what you were thinking of doing on JobKeeper. I said, as a Liberal, this is not the type of intervention I ever thought I would be announcing. And John Howard said that during crises such as these, there are no ideological constraints. Talk me through how reassuring, how important that was for Mr. Howard to say that at that point, because obviously it goes against the grain for a Liberal to do what you did.
Well, John Howard is a great Australian and a great Prime Minister of this country, and he's somebody who had the wonderful privilege of working for, and I respect him greatly. And so I sought out his advice at a number of times throughout this crisis and pandemic. And you're right, that was one time I rang him walking around this building on a weekend and picked up the phone and said, this is the elements of JobKeeper, and we're getting close to landing the program, and asked for his thoughts. And he was very reassuring, and he very clearly said to me that if this is what we think needs to be done, then that is absolutely the right thing to do then, because it is a crisis, and at times of crisis, in his words, there are no ideological constraints. So you just do, obviously, what is best for the country every day that you're in this job, and that was one day we did as well. And I'm really pleased with how JobKeeper has kept workers and their employees together, and as a result, we have seen a recovery in Australia that all Australians can be proud of.
This is our last discussion for 2020. You're going to go and I will as well, spend time with our families. But how do you reflect on this year? I mean, that's part of it, that conversation at the time. But how do you reflect on the events of this year, or is it too raw?
Well, it's probably too soon for that. And we're very much thinking about tomorrow, not yesterday, because there is a lot of work still to be done. The recovery is going to be hard. It's going to be long. There are a lot of unknowns, Kieran. The rest of the world is doing it tougher than Australia right now. But in Australia, there are a lot of people doing it very tough as well, and the government has their back and will continue to support them. And that is the transition that's underway next year when the JobKeeper payment tapers off at the end of March. So yes, I am very proud of what Australians were able to achieve this year, how we came together, how we suppressed the virus, and how we've got the economic recovery underway. But there's a lot of work still to be done, but no doubt for many, many years to come, there will be a lot of reflections and time for reflection on this unforgettable year.
Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, thank you for your time today, and throughout the year as well. We wish you and your family a restful break.
Thanks, KG.